So I'm very happy to be able to welcome you all for a talk today about our topic is revenge, more precisely revenge by Jews for the Shoah. And I just wanted to say a few introducing words because the topic has come up in German public discourse quite prominently in the last year or so. And I want to draw your attention to different perspectives that shed light on the topic. So, for example, there's another book that came out from a journalistic perspective in German by Achim Dörfer, and the title is Irgendjemand musste die Täter ja bestrafen, die Rache der Juden, das Versagen der deutschen Justiz nach 1945, das Märchen der deutsch-jüdischen Versöhnung. On the other hand, we have a cinematic perspective on the topic. There's the movie Plan A, on which it's actually a German-Israeli thriller on the group Menachem, which Professor Porat will talk to us about today. And actually, Professor Porat also advised on the film, so maybe she will also be able to talk to us about that a little bit. The movie came out in December 2021 in German cinemas, so maybe you were still lucky to get to see it somewhere. Also, there's an exhibition coming up in the Jewish Museum of Frankfurt. It's called Revenge, History and Fantasy, and is I think it's opening on the 18th of March in 2022. So please check that out. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. It's curated by Max Czolek and Erik Riedel and the director of the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt, Miriam Wenzel, Professor Miriam Wenzel, and we're very happy to also welcome her in April for one of our ABM talks. So that's going to be exciting. Yeah, and because some of us are lawyers, I'm not, I'm a political scientist, but there's also a legal perspective on the topic of Jewish revenge. And this is a very interesting topic. I think it came up in the 1990s, more precisely 1999, when a short movie was filmed about members of the Menachem group. And the two journalists actually, it led to a criminal investigation by the German prosecution in Nuremberg, where one of the only successful attack took place, the poisoning of a few hundred SS men. Nobody was killed, but the prosecution had to open an investigation because due to the documentary, new evidence was available to them, and because of the Amtsermittlungsgrundsatz, they had to open it. But this led obviously to an outcry, an international outcry. How could a German court investigate Jews who were fighting against, who were doing something against proven Nazis? And the court did something very interesting. It actually closed the case on the 8th of May in 2000, so the Tag der Befreiung, the Day of Liberation. And they had to find, or they found an interesting justification for that, because they said due to the historical circumstances, the crime actually was time barred, so it was verjährt, and the case was closed. So as you see, there are many very interesting perspectives on the topic of Jewish revenge, cinematic, musical, artistic, legal, and today we're going to focus on the historical. And we have the great pleasure to welcome our two speakers today on this day that is the International Remembrance Day of the Holocaust. And it's a very fitting day to talk about this topic and to learn about the forms that revenge took right after the Shoah and understand how it evolved. And we are very excited to welcome Professor Dina Porat and also Professor Michael Brenner, who will comment on Professor Porat's talk later. So to introduce our speakers, Professor Porat is Professor Emeritus of Modern Jewish History at the Department of Jewish History at the Tel Aviv University. She's the founding head of the Kantor Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry and the former chief historian of Yad Vashem. She published extensively in the history of the Holocaust, the Jews of Europe, and also worked on Jewish-Catholic relations. She also advised the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA. Today, though, she will talk to us about Jewish revenge and her book about a group of Jews who sought to take justice into their own hands right after the Shoah. Our talk today is named after the book, Vengeance and Retribution Are Mine, Community, the Holocaust, and Abba Kovner's Avengers. It was published in Hebrew in 2019 and is available in German since 2021. Our commentator today is Professor Brenner. He's also a historian And since 1997, he has been the professor of Jewish history and culture at the Ludwig-Maximilians University in Munich. He's also the Seymour and Lillian Abensohn Chair in Israel Studies and Director of the American University Center for Israel Studies in Washington. His scholarly focus is the history of Israel, Zionism, Jewish historiography, Jewish culture in the Weimar Republic. And I believe that his new book, Hitler's Munich, Jews, the Revolution and the Rise of Nazism, is coming out in a few months. He also wrote the introducing words to the German edition to Professor Porat's book on the Jewish Avengers. And it starts with a haunting poem by Heinrich Heine. In it, the Jewish poet speculates about seeking revenge for anti-Judaist pogroms at the time. And it reminds us of the long history of anti-Semitism and fantasies about avenging it. Before I'm giving the word to our speakers now, I'm reminding everyone that our talk is actually recorded and made publicly available after. The discussion will not be recorded. So please feel free to ask any questions you have, drop them in the chat or ask them afterwards in person. So I'm looking forward to our talk very much, and I'm giving over the microphone to Professor Porat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not so sure about asking any question. We'll see. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone who has joined us for this event. It is indeed a special day. It's International Holocaust Memorial Day. It's being mentioned all over the world. And we are mentioning it together by talking indeed about the book that deals with a group of young people, men and women, who gathered after the war, all survivors, of course, and their goal was to kill 6 million Germans. I will divide my time. I understand that I have some 40 minutes. No?
Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So we're pretty much into like 25 to 30 minutes to you as the guest speaker, and then Professor Brenner gets up to like 15, max 20 minutes to comment. So 30 to.
I'm happy to give you 5 of my minutes.
There you go. So generous. We're in a day of generosity. But, yeah, just not 40 minutes because we want to also
I understand. Okay, so I take it as half an hour. Very generous of you to give me 5 minutes, and I will divide this half an hour in the following way. First, I'd like to introduce the group. Who were they? What is characteristic? What is common to them? Who is the group? Second, the context. Perhaps not everyone here is an historian, but we certainly all know that in any profession, you do not detach one piece, one event, one person, one organization. It always has to be in the context. So my second point is the context, the post-war European context. A third point is why. You would say why? Of course, because the Germans killed 6 million Jews. But right after the war, there are many more reasons that are connected not just to the Holocaust, but to what happens once the war is over. And here I will really emphasize, after having heard you and your interest in law and the project that you have in law, I will also focus on how the members of the group, regarded law at the time. So the third point will be the reasons. The fourth one will be shortly the story. No, they wanted, and what did they do, and what happened to them. And we will end, though I will weave it into the fourth point of the story. What was the attitude of the Zionist leadership, especially in pre-state Israel, which we call the Yishuv, the Hebrew community in pre-state Israel? what was their attitude, them, the leadership, the Haganah, which was the military underground, the Palmach, the Jewish brigade under the British Army, what were they thinking and doing? Okay, so this is our plan, and I will start right away with the first point. And the first point is, indeed, who are they? We said 50 young men and women, all survivors, most of them partisans, and if not partisans, they were members of undergrounds in the ghettos, or were caught, sent to camps, but managed to run away from the camps, or from the death march, active, very active and responding and not passive young men and women. Okay, they mostly came from Eastern Europe. They formed the group from a number of groups, the main one coming from Vilna under the leadership of the poet and partisan Abba Kovner, who was the leader of this group, an admired leader in everywhere he went, and in this case as well. So there was a group from Vilna, one from Częstochowa, a good number from Krakow, two from the Warsaw Ghetto. So they came, as we said, from Eastern Europe, and one should say that I think at least that they have a sort of a collective identity because they all were of more or less the same age. They were in the late teens or beginning of the 20s. They were all educated in the excellent Jewish educational system that flourished between the wars. Most of them knew Hebrew, most of them spoke Yiddish. Yiddish was their language, the main language. Some of them knew Polish, of course, Russian, Lithuanian a bit. So they had good education, Jewish one, and they were mostly members of Zionist youth movements or other youth movements, but youth movements, which means that they were raised on looking at the political situation, analyzing it, thinking about it, being ideologically committed, and most of them, especially I would say under the influence of Abba Kovner, were committed to, these are high words, but this is the way they felt, committed to a certain responsibility, to bearing responsibility for Jewish history, Jewish culture, and especially Jewish honor during the time when honor wasn't exactly held up. Okay, so this is more or less the group. I would say that I met 34 of them, and indeed there are in the book 34 short biographies with a photo of each of them. I met them when I was writing the biography of Abba Kovner, and but then when I was writing it in the 1990s, I didn't interview them about revenge, but about their connection to him along all his life. Youth movement in Vilna, and the Soviet rule and the Nazi and going out to the forest, etc., 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 and in the land of Israel, but not about revenge. Now, what happened was that when the biography came out, I had in it only a page and a half about this group of Avengers, because it was a biography about him and not about them. They were horribly angry, and they caught me by the 2 ears and I had to promise a book. And I fulfilled the promise, but I had also two other reasons to write it. First, you must know, the lady who spoke, Anne Catherine, I think, spoke about the interest recently in Germany about revenge. But I must tell you that there is very little research about revenge, very few books. I found 2 books that comprehensively look at the issue of revenge outside Israel, written in English, in Israel as well, in Jewish culture. It's not an elegant issue. It's what you say in Yiddish, es passt doch nicht. It's not appropriate. It's an uncivilized issue. You take the law into your hands, you kill people. Where are we going to get to with such activities? The author Aaron Appelfeld said, Jewish DNA does not include revenge. Okay, maybe he's right. Maybe after the Holocaust he's not so right. But anyhow, there is very little written. And of course, if there is very little written, I have every motivation to write. And the third reason is that I came to know them. We befriended. They came to my and my husband's house. I came to their homes. They hosted me. They gave me all the material that they were keeping for decades, because they felt that what has been written before wasn't serious enough, wasn't really research, it was journalistic. And they gave me whatever they found, photos, documents in all languages. But I kept telling them, Kinderlach, we are great friends, but I do think that killing 6 million people is not such a terribly good idea. And they said, had you been there with us at the time, you would have joined us. Had Jesus been there with us, he would have joined us as well. You just don't understand. Okay, I tried to understand, and I tried to understand the discrepancy between these people, educated, with values, with national responsibility, filled with strength and humor. They endured such horrors, but they are hilariously funny, with humor and with the joy of life between them and between the deed that they wanted to do. Okay, so this is the group. These are my reasons. And now I move to the context. Second point. You cannot, as we said, detach a group or an event or whatever out of its context. And the context was post-war Europe. Now, post-war Europe was imbued with a wish, a burning wish to take revenge on the Germans. I'm sorry to say that to German people, but this is how it was. Those who led the revenge movement, I'm speaking now about non-Jews, were the Soviets. When the Red Army entered Germany, from the east, of course, on the roads, under the command of General Andrei Zhukov, the architect of the conquest of Germany, under his command, specific command, there were signs on the road in Russian, in the entrance, which said, "Soldier, you are now on German soil. Take revenge from the Hitlerites." This was the word, Hitleristim. Now, they did. You didn't have to ask them too much. The Soviet Union lost 20 million people, 10 civilians and 10 soldiers. And I will not enter the horrors that Germany did on Soviet soil. So they were leading horrible revenge and rape In Berlin only in 1946, there were about 50,000 new babies with no hope to find a father. What they did, but they were not the only ones. Polish authorities opened camps in which they put and imprisoned Volksdeutsche, Germans who were outside of Germany, and treated them very badly. In the Czechs, it was still Czechoslovakia, under Jan Masaryk, opened camps with the same wording as in Auschwitz, and Jan Masaryk said over the radio, "We will do to them worse than they did to us." So it is, please don't look at revenge as a Jewish matter. It was all over, all over. There were about 5-6 million laborers, forced laborers, non-Jews, who were brought to Germany 43, 44, because of the shortage in manpower. The war was over. They were brought from all of Europe. They didn't want to go home. They didn't want to go home before they take revenge. So this was the atmosphere. Now, regarding the Jews, everyone wanted revenge, of course. Everyone lost. The family, most of the families. People who survived were 1 or 2 from families of dozens. So of course, but I'll say right from the beginning that very few Jews indeed took revenge. Although each dreamt about it, wrote about it, spoke about it, but didn't do that. I will say shortly that partisans who came out of the forests, mainly in the Ukraine, with the blessing of the Soviets, of course, with Soviet weapons, found and took Ukrainians who were known to have killed their families, communities, took them back to the forest and killed them one by one, a few hundreds. Then there was in Vienna a group, a certain youth movement group, who executed, identified Austrian war criminals. And then there was the Jewish Brigade. The Jewish Brigade was composed of 5,000 soldiers, all coming from the land of Israel to fight the Nazis and to rescue Jews, and they were part of the British Army. When the war was over, they were positioned in the north of Italy, at the border with Yugoslavia and Austria, and they also, a group of them, a secret group within them, took vehicles at night, went out, knocked on the doors of identified war criminals, took them out, took them to the forest, to a lake, told them they are being judged by the Jewish people for crimes against it, and killed them. I think they 100, 150, then they were moved on, and that's it. And of course, there were individuals. I cannot tell you how many, but there were individuals who did not rest and did not sleep until they came to the house of the person who killed their family and shot him or strangled him or whatever, but I cannot tell you how many. This is very hard to collect, certainly to quantify. So, what's different about our group? Here you have some 3 groups. The difference is the following. This group wanted to kill not identified. The other ones killed only by identity, which is a sort of a trial and not just revenge. They wanted non-identified, 6 million for the 6 million Jews. And they wanted to do it not at night when no one sees and then bury someone or what. No, they wanted all the world to know that 6 million Germans have been killed for killing 6 million Jews, so that whoever has new ideas about hurting the Jews or harming the Jewish people will think twice. It should be open. It should be a nation vis-a-vis a nation. The Jewish people against or vis-a-vis the German people. So this was definitely different. Okay. Now, the context is the context of the general wish to revenge and what Jews did. And I emphasize again that most Jews, most survivors who were gathered in the DP camps, some 180,000 in Germany, about 40,000 in Austria, some 15, 20 in Italy, and others who went home and were not in camps, most of them did not take revenge, but decided that the best revenge is to build a new family, raise a new family, live among Jews and not among Gentiles anymore, and if possible, go to Israel. 2/3 of them went to the land of Israel, 1/3 to the Americas. But there is one more area that I have to put in as context. And this is the analysis of our group, the members of the group. We said that they were educated on political and ideological thinking and analysis. They analyzed the post-war situation, and they decided that this situation compels them to take revenge, not only the fact that they lost the families and the Jewish people, etc., lost the third, etc., etc. But first of all, they saw that Germany is being rebuilt. America needed Germany as a barrier, a buffer against the Soviets. The Cold War was on its way. And here is the Marshall Plan to rebuild Germany. And Germany is being rebuilt. So who is going to be punished? The German nation, as they understood it, should be punished, not rebuilt. And here it is rebuilt. No? Okay, that's one point. Second point is that after a while of having tens and tens of thousands of SS prisoners in Allied camps, mainly the British and the Americans, it was an enormous task to feed them, to interrogate them, to give them a roof and medical treatment, After a while, the gates of these camps were opened and the Allies said, Chevre, you go home. Which means, as they saw it, that Germany is not only being rebuilt, it's being rebuilt with the same people who were members of the Nazi Party and the Allgemeine SS and the Waffen SS, etc. It's the same Germany. So what have we done? Where is justice? Where is punishment? Where is telling the story of the Jewish people? Third point, not only the Marshall Plan, not only the release of prisoners, but the Nuremberg trials began, as you remember, October, November 1945. A large group of the Avengers was situated in Nuremberg, and I'll tell the story in a minute. And then the trial started, but there is no representation of the Jewish people. We don't have a state. No one really represents us formally. Jews are scattered and are citizens of so many countries. There wasn't even one Jewish witness in the trials, except for 20 minutes given to the poet Avram Sutzkever. Okay, but not real representation. And the Holocaust itself was not dealt as an issue in itself in the Nuremberg trials. It came up, of course, in the trials, but the trials dealt with the high echelons, not with the public at large. And again, there is no justice and no law. And what they said revenge must be taken because there is no law. The situation that happened under Nazi rule requires new laws, new terms. And the judges that lived at that time, they were brought up on formal law. They wouldn't know how to judge. They didn't understand the Holocaust. And luckily to them, they didn't undergo the Holocaust. And so there will be no law, no judge, and no justice. This is how, definitely, how they felt. And it reinforced their wish to take revenge the way they saw it. Okay, so that's their view of the situation. And indeed, when Kovner wrote down the goals of the group, the goals were that we need justice, that the world is coming back to normal. The Holocaust will be forgotten very soon. No one cares. No one cares. No one cares about the Jews. They care about Germany. And if so, we want not only justice and punishment, we want a warning. As we said, a warning against such thoughts in the future. Okay, so this is more or less their motivation. And now what happened? What happened is really a detective story. And what happened was the following. They decided to kill these 6 million by pouring poison into the water systems of some 8 major German cities. And so they went, they were formed in Lublin, in Bucharest, came to the Jewish Brigade, and then they went, Kovner sailed to the land of Israel to get poison and to get support, and they scattered in groups in Germany, looking for the water systems, trying to become workers, laborers in the water systems, which they succeeded here and there. But in a short while, it became quite clear that Germany is still so very destroyed. They wanted to start with Berlin, symbolically, of course, but Berlin was so destroyed that they couldn't act there, and in other places as well. And so they narrowed the number to Hamburg, Nuremberg, and Dachau. In Nuremberg, they were already with their hand as on the water system, the thing that opens the water. Okay.
The Leistung, I think it's called in German. Yeah. At least, yeah.
One of them was by profession, was a plumber by profession, and he was a very nice person, spoke well German, and was accepted to work there in Nuremberg. And he also devised a way to have the poison go only to the drinking water of the German city and not to the Allies camps or the refugees camps. They were ready. In the meantime, Kovner sailed, as we said, to the land of Israel, in which he got poison. He got poison. He got it not from Dr. Chaim Weizmann, which is a legend, not at all. He got it from 2 brothers, Haron and Ephraim, at that time Kachalski, and later Katzir. Ephraim Katzir became the 4th president of Israel later. At that time, the end of 1945, the summer of 1945, they were both, he and his brother, students in the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. And Kovner came up to them. He was introduced to them, told them the story of the Holocaust. Of course, the story was known, but not to such detail and not from a living person. And so they said, and I know exactly what they said, because Ephraim Katzir, after he finished his job as the president of the country, had an office in a building in Tel Aviv University. He was a world-known chemist. And I asked him to have an interview, and I have a recorded and signed interview with him. And he said that he and his brother were members of the Haganah. Haganah was the military underground in the land of Israel. There were young members, active, and Kovner understood the moment he set foot in Israel that he should not speak about the 6 million. No one will agree.
Nobody needs you to talk.
Sorry?
Nobody needs you to talk.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Hello there.
What?
Hail Hitler.
He's a Zoom bomber. He's a Zoom bomber. Don't care about him.
Smart have two faces.
What is this exactly?
Barack Obama.
No idea. Sandra, any chance you
You
can?
have to throw them out.
Yeah, who has a co-host? Who was it?
I
It's
think
just-
they are out already.
Make a new meeting. This link got posted on Twitter.
Not yet already.
No, can you throw them out? Like it's the last people who, I think it's Harry Oliver.
Lenovo.
Yeah, exactly. Also maybe Thomas.
They don't like the topic.
And we really don't care.
Okay.
So I think we
Shut
can.
up, you bitch. Fucking bitch ass Ruti. Fucking bitch.
You have to make sure nobody enters either.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Let's try. I think, okay.
I want to tell him that bitch in Yiddish is klafte.
Much more doable.
In case he needs a word.
Okay, I'm so sorry about this. Please go on.
It's okay. Okay, should I go on?
Yes, please. And Anna, just don't let anybody in.
Okay. So as we said, when this group of Avengers met the Jewish Brigade and started speaking very softly, very secretly about 6 million, no one wanted to hear. There was a total opposition to such a horrible idea. So when he came to the land of Israel, he was speaking about Plan B. This was Plan A. About Plan B, which was
Are you guys leftists or rightists?
to poison the bread or given to the SS prisoners still in the camps of the Allies. And this, as Katzir told me, of course, to poison or to act against SS people, that's a mitzvah. That's a commandment that you should do, absolutely. And he went down with his brother to the laboratory, told the whole story to the person in charge, and in a few days, Kovner got quite an amount of poison to take with him back to Europe. But he didn't make it back to Europe because I will not get into it because my half an hour is about to finish. But he did not get there because the British, he went back, of course,
Heil Hitler.
with the British documents, with uniforms and the falsified paper, and he was discovered by the British on the ship. They arrested him. He threw the
Heil
poison
Hitler.
into the sea, and he was arrested for a few months. So our Avengers are in Germany with no Kovner and with no poison. And also with surveillance of Yishuv delegates who are afraid that they will really kill 6 million Germans. And where will the Jewish people be? How can anyone support giving us a state if Jewish people killed 6 million, no matter who, German, others. It's not a thing to be done in any way. And so one bright night with a full moon weekend, they entered a bakery in which a few of them were already working, and they put poison on 3,000 loaves of bread to be given to 12,000 prisoners of war, a quarter of a loaf to each, and they were very happy. The guards came, there was wind and a broken window that they had to run away. But they sent, the day later, came someone to see what happened. Nothing happened. They didn't manage well with the poison. They weren't professional poisoners. They didn't know how to deal it really. And there were many medical disturbances among the prisoners, but the Americans who saw that there is a big problem in the camp took them all, shipped them to hospitals, and saved them all. And then the Haganah and the Jewish leadership, the Zionist leadership said, Kinderlach, enough is enough. You did your thing with the loaves of bread. Now we are putting you on a ship to the land of Israel. And they were sent to the land of Israel, where they fought all of them, almost all of them. In 1948, I said almost because part of the group went back to Europe to continue revenge, but did not succeed. Most of them fought in the War of Independence, 1948, and many of them were later recruited by the Mossad, because these were ideal people for Mossad. They knew how to walk around with false identity, with false papers. They were courageous to cross borders. And then they chose professions and families and were quiet. They kept quiet for 40 years. They kept quiet as a secret. They took a vow not to tell the story. Only in the middle of the 1980s, when Kovner became sick with cancer of the vocal cords, they began to tell and record their story. So this is the story, and I will end it by saying that the majority of the Jewish people did not take revenge, despite what was done to it, and I don't have to tell you what was done to it. And this group failed. They failed. They were very happy that such a group existed at all, and today they are a kind of a symbol. And I will end by two remarks. One, I was always wondering, how come these people who were quiet for 40 years and no one wanted to hear about the 6 million? When I started interviewing them some 10 years ago, and I took them to events, they were accepted warmly, wholeheartedly. No, but these are the same people who wanted to kill 6 million, no? Only they were already in the 70s and 80s, 90s. Today, only 3 are alive. One is 102, and there are 2 ladies, 98. Why were they accepted warmly suddenly? And I think that this is because they serve as a kind of a stop on the road, because relations with Germany developed from the 1950s and the reparations, 1960s, a German ambassador, and then more and more. And we didn't have a better friend than Angela Merkel, etc., etc. But the public feeling is that, okay, there are good relations with Germany on all levels, but they were forgiven too early. Not forgiven, but it's not forgiving or forgetting, of course, but we went too quickly. They were not punished. There was no justice ever done, really, according to Israeli public opinion. And so they were accepted as people who wanted to do the right thing. One last point is that in the French area, Germany was divided into four. In the French area, a French officer was situated in a German village, went around to see who is in his area, and found a camp with Jewish refugees. He was so horrified to see the situation. The next day, he took a few trucks. I found his testimony. He took a few trucks. He brought the survivors on the trucks to the village, made the villagers leave their homes and stand in front of the survivors, gave the survivors pistols, revolvers, and said, kill them. I ask you and allow you to kill them and take their homes. And they said, are you out of your mind? We don't know these people. Well, why should you kill them? Maybe they have been here all the war and didn't touch any Jew. They have not known any Jew. There are no men in the village. There are only women and children and elderly. And he said, no, I insist. Kill them and take their homes. Look at how you look and how they look. And they said, sorry, we don't do such things. They went back on the trucks and back to the camp. So the Yishuv did not take revenge. Zionist leadership wanted the state, wanted the survivors to come. Survivors wanted to rehabilitate themselves. And all in all, our story ends with a note that revenge was not taken. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Porat, very much for your talk, for your fascinating research, and also for staying so strong, even though we had this unfortunate incidents, which only makes me stronger in my conviction to work on this and to hear these stories and talk about these stories. And I'm now very interested and looking forward to Professor Brenner's comment on the talk.
Thank you. And thank you, Dina, for the book and for the talk. And I will be very brief because we're really here to hear your account. And I also imagine that there will be quite a lot of questions to you. So when I started where to start, I'm actually going back as a historian who deals more with the period before, both before and after, but not so much with the Shoah. I was thinking of an event that happened in Paris in 1926, when a young Jew in his 30s identified an Ukrainian anti-Semite called Petel Yura, who was a leader of the Ukrainian, very short-lived Ukrainian government in 1920 of the independent Ukraine, in a time when many pogroms happened. And this man called Shalom Schwarzbard shot, I think, 5 times on the street in Paris and killed Petel Yura. The remarkable thing is not so much that this Ukrainian Jew took revenge for what happened to his family and his community. He said 15 of his closest relatives were murdered, not in the Holocaust. We're talking about 1920, 1919 in Ukraine. The remarkable thing that there was a trial after that. And the jury in Paris came to the conclusion that Shalom Schwarzbard was not guilty, although he admitted having shot him and everybody knew he shot him. And there were a few other cases, and maybe the lawyers here know, or the legal experts know more than me. There was, I think, a similar case with an Armenian who shot also somebody very much implied into the Armenian mass murder in Turkey and so on. So there were cases when people who clearly admitted of having killed another person were convicted not guilty in a trial. And I thought that was an interesting story to start with when we talk about the real Holocaust. I mean, we should not forget that the crimes in 1918 to 21 were also, they are often forgotten. Actually, there's a very new book out, and we had a discussion that yesterday on Zoom with Jeffrey Weidlinger, who wrote a book just fresh out of the press about these pogroms in the Ukraine, mainly in 1918 to 21, where about 100,000 Jews were killed. But when we talk about the even much bigger scale of crimes in the Holocaust, we don't really have and correct me, Dina, if I'm wrong, a Shalom Schwarzbart, somebody who went and just, took justice into his own hands and killed a Jew. What you describe, of course, are the attempts that existed.
Yes.
And I thought that is actually, again, of course, as you say, the remarkable thing, and I think we always have to repeat it, is what did not happen. To just, since I'm not an expert in this particular story, to say a few more words about the context. I think we really have to distinguish here what is the context of the society dealing with the Holocaust in Israel and on the other side in Germany. In Israel, I think after 1945, very often the accusation to the survivors or to even the people who were killed was, you didn't do enough to resist. You were taken like, lambs to the slaughterhouse. And that was the outspoken or sometimes non-spoken accusation, which some people try to react and explain also why why there was no way of a systematic resistance. In Germany, of course, it was very different. That was not a discussion. In Germany, the discussion was much more on what we would call the Täterseite, about the perpetrators. And so we have two very different contexts in both of which I would say the story of Nakam and those issues for different reasons was also repressed for a long time. And maybe a word about the context. That's a topic I did deal with in my scholarship, and that's the community of surviving Jews in post-war Germany, the so-called DPs or displaced persons, because that is a remarkable story. It's of course, there's been much written about it also in the last years, but still it sometimes goes between this whole history between 45 and 50 is buried between the Holocaust history, which is well researched, of course, and then the beginning of the Jewish state starting in 1948. But there were about 250,000, at least, we don't have exact numbers, Jewish displaced persons, mainly in the American zone of Germany. They did live not only in camps, but a large part lived in camps. And what we also have to remember is that many of them, the majority, lived in places where there were no Jewish communities prior to the Holocaust. I mean, these were small villages in the south of Bavaria, also in the north of Bavaria, in Hessen, Baden-Württemberg. And in many of those places, there were 5,000 or 6,000 Jews in the largest camps in Wolfratshausen, Föhrenwald, Feldafing, Pocking, I mean, places they had never seen a Jewish community. And now you had thousands of Jews. They were quite well organized. They had their own parties. They had their own Lagerpolizei in the DP camps. They had their football teams. They had yeshivas. They had Yiddish theaters. They had newspapers. And my question maybe also to Dina is, they were very well organized. They were there not for a moment, but they were there for years. In my view, if they really had wanted to take action, they probably could have done it. And I think there is a reason why these attempts failed.
There were no attempts.
Sorry?
There were no attempts that failed. They just didn't do that.
Yes, Yes. And so what I'm saying is, and I think that just confirms your research, had these plans, were there, if there had there been more of these plans over the years in the DP camps, yes, they might have actually succeeded, but they weren't there. And the situation, of course, was in the camps was mainly one of transition. Yes, they lived in Germany, but there was also interaction with Germans, was unavoidable, but it was very often limited because they lived not in a political entity, which was Germany. It was the American zone of Germany. And I always think one of the speeches of the leader of the liberated Jews gives expression to that very well when he said, Samuel Gringatz, in a speech in 1946, I have to check it now, when he said, when we, meaning the surviving Jews, when we think of Europe, we do not think of Westminster Abbey or Versailles or the Strasbourg Cathedral or the art treasures of Florence. For us, Europe, he says, is the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the pogroms of Russia, and the gas chambers of Auschwitz. And then he ended his speech with this call saying, adieu, Europe. We are leaving. The Jews have no future in Europe. So in a way, I think it also gave expression to this sense, this is behind us. This continent, we have closed this chapter of Jews in Europe. And that might be, now I'm looking for reasons why there weren't many more attempts of revenge. For many, it was a closed chapter, but I think another reason, of course, and again mentioned by you, is very important as well. Somebody, I think you said it's not in the Jewish DNA. Leo Beck, who survived Theresienstadt, the German rabbi, said, we cannot respond to a crime with another crime. And I think there was a lot of awareness that, yes, the people who are guilty have to be punished. But, those, at least the German Jews realized there were also some Germans, they were in the concentration camps with them. Maybe we have to distinguish. Maybe 90% have to be punished, but what about the other 10%? Maybe 80%. So there was this sense, I think, among some of the survivors as well. And as I closed, as I started with the Schwarzbart case and the story 1926, I think maybe an ending point, and in a way also a beginning point for a new kind of dealing with the past, was the Eichmann trial in 1961, when, yes, there was one individual, but of course he set on trial also representing a whole, maybe not nation, but a whole group of Nazi criminals. And I think at that point, there was a sense that, yes, we can, if the Germans do not do enough to give justice, we can do it here as well in Israel, and we can bring all the witnesses to court and get the news out. So there were attempts, I would say, to go away from the Schwarzbards taking justice into our own hands. Now we have our own state. Now we have our own justice system, and we can also take care of some of those criminals. The last point, it is a very sensitive topic, and I think the voices in the background we've just heard disturbing our event today show this is not a closed story. There are people who will still very much try to deny everything that happened or disturb any attempt to deal with it in a scholarly fashion. And that is one reason why I would say many historians have hesitated, maybe more in Germany or more in outside of Israel, to touch a topic like that. would it give food to anti-Semites who would react? Well, my opinion, I said that in my preface or afterward in the book, it doesn't need those people, of course. We don't need them. We don't need those reasons to give them. They would always exist. They don't, if we deal with these topics or not deal with these topics, I would say for people who say, well, we have to be very careful of these topics. So we are historians, and as historians, we have to write, we have to go back to the facts, and we can interpret them in different ways. But if it was a fact that the group like Nakam existed and they did what they did, of course we have to tell the story, and we shouldn't leave it to those who would wrongly interpret it, who can't even read the original sources, who can no longer talk to them. So I think we're really grateful to Dina to have done this, because it is about time to tell the story of this group, and it is time to also tell it from somebody who is able to write that story.
Thank you.